by the statistical guru who every week is appointment reading for me when it gets to my email box from the 15th Club. Justin Ray, what's going on?
Just happy we've got a Masters to play, man. It's 7 months late, but better late than never. Fired up for this week to get started.
Yeah, we're going to do a deep dive here, getting your statistical analysis, which, hey, if gambling were legal and you wanted to throw a little capital in certain directions, maybe you'll pick something up on this podcast. We want to also answer all your questions, whether it's about the statistical breakdown of the Masters, Team Callaway at the Masters. Maybe it's about, have you seen these new Azalea small batch putters that the Odyssey guys are selling right now? They're probably going to sell out. The last one's only lasted about 10 minutes. These things are beautiful. OdysseyGolf.com. Lots of content on CallawayGolf.com, but on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter, we'll be answering your questions. So send them in your way. Jen, Royce, and Matt are in the background. They're sending them to me. But J. Ray, I want to start off, first off, with big congratulations to you and your wife going to be a dad. That's the most exciting part.
Thank you. We're extremely excited. I really appreciate it, Jeff.
All right. So
it's exciting time.
You sent out your newsletter this morning. Again, go to the 15th Club and you can subscribe to get this newsletter. And you had a take that I've been thinking about for a little bit of a while, and I love when you actually back it up statistically, because then I can go talk around and kind of pretend I'm smart, but I'm just regurgitating your info. But it's about strokes gained approach. Let's explain to people first what strokes gained approach is and why it matters so much more at Augusta National than everywhere else. And I have a theory to refute some of the winners back in the day.
Right. So basically, strokes gained approach is how much better you are than the field average on your approach shot. So everything you hit into a green, whether it's a tee shot on a par 3 or those approach shots into 4s and 5s. So typically, your mid irons or short irons, anything that's outside about 50 yards, that's what 15 Club defines the boundary between an approach shot and shots like around the green, like pitches. So over the last 5 years, look, we don't have oceans of data from the new age type shot by shot data, but we've got it for the last 5 years at Augusta National. And it can't paint a clearer picture about the significance of strokes gained approach. Over the last 5 years, the player to lead the field in strokes gained approach at the Masters has finished first, second, third, and first. Tiger Woods last year led the field in strokes gained approach. I know conversationally, you probably heard your entire life, Augusta National is a second shot golf course. It's one of the great colloquialisms about Augusta. The numbers bear it out, man. It's absolutely the truth. If you want to succeed at Augusta National, you've got to put yourself in good positions on those greens with those approach shots.
Yeah, and so for years and years and years, and I'm much older than you, but what I remember about the Masters is it was always whoever putts the best, because the greens are the defensive Augusta, the most tricky greens on the planet. Well, strokes gained approach actually has it all make sense. We did a podcast, our podcast, Almost an Hour with Henrik Stenson. We do that every other week on the Callaway Golf Podcast Network. And Henrik said that it's really that what he loves about Augusta is that the greens reward excellence in a shot. But if you're just off of excellence, you're in a really bad spot. So this all makes sense because strokes gained approach, if you're successful in that metric, like on 10, there's a very small window, because we know where the holes are going to be. Very small window to hit it to where you don't have that crazy downhill 30-foot bending putt, which you're probably going to 3-putt. So yes, putting's important, but if you succeed in strokes gained approach, your putting becomes manageable there, right?
Absolutely. And this is where this strokes gained approach is superior to a traditional statistic like greens in regulation, right? Because if you just hit the green in regulation, depending on your position, you could have hit a really good shot, or it might be a poor shot. It's not necessarily if you miss a green, but it's just off and you're in a better position to get up and down,
below the hole,
maybe chip in below the hole. That's what you want. And that's more valuable than just hitting the putting surface. So,
and what about putting stats though?
So my theory is that, putting is so difficult at Augusta National. This doesn't sound like a big percentage jump, but players are about 2% less likely to make a putt inside 10 feet at Augusta than they are in a regular PGA Tour event. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but over the course of a week, it adds up. It adds up to, probably about maybe half a stroke or a stroke, which is significant. So I think that the putting is difficult enough to where it's a little bit of a neutralizing factor. It's tough to gain a lot of strokes on the opposition through the putters simply because it's just difficult to execute those things, right? So you're more likely to gain that advantage through superior approach play. And that's kind of where the strokes gained approach thing bears out.
Yeah, and I think the other key one that I always looked at, again, this was before we had the new era of stats, was they always talked about 3-putt avoidance. that if you can avoid three putting, but in reality, the way to avoid three putting is not putting better. It's leaving yourself in the right spot so you can avoid three putting.
Correct. Yeah, you don't want to leave yourself 52 feet with a big double break or whatever that might be, because then you're really putting that three putt into question. So three putt avoidance and even putts per green in regulation, those traditional statistics, they all tie back into that previous shot, whatever you're going to hit into those greens that have all those nuances and they're tough to read for a reason. And if you can put yourself in a better position for that second shot, like you said, that's going to give you better opportunities to make putts.
All right, well, we're going to ask you about some specific players on Team Callaway that I want to get your take on. But the other big story this week is going to be the distance barrage. And, look, you have an Astros Cup there. We can talk about that if you'd like.
That was unfortunate. I didn't mean to do that, but I try to avoid conversationally as much as possible.
All right, well, I have my Tua Tagovailoa Dolphins Cup over here, but I'll leave it out of frame for now. We can do that on another podcast.
Fair enough.
But, if you think about the players that have been, challenging this golf course, and look, nothing showed distance more than Tiger back in the day when he set the all-time record for distance. They've renovated the golf course since then. They're always tweaking it. They now mow. We all know, everyone talks about it. Phil talked about it last week on this podcast. They mow the grain of the grass from the green to the tee. The ball hits, and that causes mud if it's wet, which we think there's going to be some rain potentially in the next 24, 48 hours. Distance, I'm not going to say his name, but there's a certain guy who's out there with a club who potentially could, maybe even drive some of these greens. Phil's going with a longer driver, and he documented that on this pod last week, where he's trying to carry it 315, 320 to have the difference between a 9-iron or 8-iron and a sand wedge. What do you think statistically about increased distance at this golf course? Because we talked about it before we came on. The rough second cut isn't going to challenge these guys.
Yeah, our numbers say that Augusta National is basically, the impact of the rough is negligible. It's as little as there is anywhere in professional golf. So the player in question you mentioned, the strategy he took at Winged Foot, that advantage isn't necessarily built in at Augusta National, where the rough was extremely penalizing everywhere at Winged Foot, right? So the approaches from 70, 80, 90 yards weren't as impacted as an approach from 120, 130. So the rough being high everywhere and penalizing to everybody actually benefited the player who hit it further. That's not necessarily the case here at Augusta National, because that rough isn't as penalizing. So look, distance is going to help players anywhere you play golf, but I just don't think that advantage is built in quite as much at Augusta. It's going to help a little bit. That there's no question about that. But especially on some holes on the back nine, the most significant hole, our numbers tell us, where players, if they attack and gain a little bit of distance, the 10th hole is going to give you a little bit of advantage with some extra yardage. The 11th, the 13th. So there's a stretch there on the second nine. Apologies, got to change my terminology 1 week.
Exactly.
There are a few holes on the second nine where it can make a pretty significant impact, maybe 0.2 of a stroke if you gain a significant amount of distance. But it's just not as built in as maybe it is week to week on the PGA Tour or at the last major championship we saw.
All right. Well, shameless plug. Next week on this podcast, we're going to have our buddy Bill McAtee on. Bill will be staged once again in the pivotal, we like to call it, the pivotal 14th hole. And you had a cool note on the 14th hole. Do you mind sharing that information? Because I think it's the one hole that everyone kind of thinks is, that's the boring one between 13 and 15, when in reality, it's very impactful.
Right. So we looked at the scoring averages on the 14 on all the holes for Masters champions since 2010. And comparing it to the field average, the 14th hole is actually the most impactful. It's the one hole where winners of the Masters have gained more strokes on the field. On average, it's over 0.4 of a stroke per hole. So you're looking at nearly half a shot for winners throughout the week. That adds up to almost 2 strokes throughout the tournament if you're going 0.4 times 4. So it's a pretty significant advantage. And it's over the last 10 years, if you want to win, the numbers have shown you've got to be successful and gain some strokes on the field there on that 14th.
Yeah, and a side note, this will be Bill's 30th Masters. He doesn't like people talking about that because that probably means he's 30, more than 31.
That man's ageless. That man is ageless.
He's completely ageless. Can't wait to talk to him a little bit about it next week. All right, we got our first question here from Joe Panko on Facebook. Will the longest drive win this week, or will the best putter win this week? I think we said it's going to be the best strokes gained approach, but if you had to pick someone between those two, what would it be?
Well, I'd say that only 4 of the last 30 Masters champions led the field in driving distance that week. You mentioned that Tiger Woods note from 1997. One of my favorite stats about the Masters that may actually be eclipsed this week. That's still the single week Masters record for driving distance. And that speaks to not only what Tiger did that week and how unbelievable he was off the tee, but the modifications they made to the course afterwards to pretty much render that, less likely to happen. I think the second longest average driving distance for a week now at the Masters was Tony Finau last year, and it was still 8 yards behind what Tiger did in 97. So I'll say if you're going to pick between driving distance and putting, I'll pick the better putter. Patrick Reed, a couple of years ago when he won, was he putted and chipped his tail off. That was the reason why he won the tournament. His iron play was good, but he was able to account for the differential between the rest of the field there with some just otherworldly putting and chipping. I'll say that if I've got to pick between driving distance and putting, I'll go with putting.
All right, I'll join you on that. Matt Dawson on Facebook wants to know, with it being softer and playing longer, will the better, longer iron players have an advantage?
Like we said earlier, I think inherently that is the key at Augusta Nationals, that approach play plays a big role, the most significant role statistically. I think I do expect it to play a little bit longer. If you listen to a lot of the players, they say, every year if you come back and play in the fall, the public doesn't get to see it. But when they go back out there and play it, it plays a little bit longer. Add that rain into the forecast. I think Kevin Kisner, I think he said when referring to how long it is, he said it's going to be, I think, miserable or something was the adjective he used to describe just how long it's going to play. So I think there's going to be, regardless of how far you're going to hit it, maybe this side of the guys who hit it the furthest of the field, there's going to be a decent number of long iron shots. So yes, I think that will play a role this week.
Yeah, and the prop bets are always kind of fun when you kind of look at some players like that, because you can look at someone, if they say things early in their press conference, right, and you can tell, that guy's not going to have a good week. The one prop bet that's my lock of the week that I'll just give is Henrik Stenson will win low suite.
Solid. I think you could run to the bank with that one. I don't know which book's giving that out, but
I'm hoping someone after watching this posts it, because I'm going to be all over that one. Should be. We talked about it last week. It should be the lock of all time.
Nice.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about teeing off on the 10th versus teeing off on the 1st. Would you still call it the second nine if it's your first nine? Would you call it how would you statistically, when you do your stats, how are you going to refer to those holes if you teed off at first, even though it's second?
I've got to consult with Green Jackets on that. I don't want to get in the way of the terminology. I'm assuming it's still the second nine. I don't think they want to be called the back nine, just like it's not the rough for fans or, So as far as the statistical impacts, there are a few players who Rory McIlroy is a key example here of players who have really struggled on one side and been really successful,
especially the 10th hole.
Especially the 10th hole. Well, especially you think about what happened back in 2010 when he could have won. But over the last 5 years, Rory is 4 under on the first nine and 24 under on the second nine. So there's a few instances where players have a differential, a big split, and maybe you think, okay, maybe it's getting the feel for a round, and there's some impact that goes into getting to the 10th hole in your round and finding more success at Augusta. I'm not totally sure. We haven't been able to juxtapose it with players starting on that second nine to see that bear out. But as far as terminology goes, I'm going to say first nine, second nine until I'm alerted otherwise. But
I just think it's interesting if it's someone's first nine of the event, but they're teeing off on the back nine, it just kind of leads to a little bit of confusion. But it probably makes sense just to keep it normal. The other point that Phil brought up, I thought really was an interesting part, and Phil's good at giving these interesting points, is that the winner has come from the last group so often recently, and one of the reasons Phil said is because by the time you get to Amen Corner, where the wind is most critical to not make a mistake, it's normally around 6 o'clock Eastern, and the wind is laid down. This year, if there is wind, especially on the weekend, especially on Sunday with that early finish, and let me tell you, I love the early finish, especially out here on the West Coast by 10:30, 11 o'clock. We're almost done. Get a whole half day to go watch football and do stuff. But there could be wind in Amen Corner for those last groups. Phil actually made the prediction that the winner is not going to come from those last couple groups. I wanted to get your take and analysis on Phil's take.
That's a really interesting theory, and I think I would adhere to it with that the note about the wind. To speak to that, not just the last group, but in terms of, we always think about the big Sunday charge at Augusta, but it's more of a perception thing because there's so many scoring opportunities on that back nine that in reality, not everybody who you see in contention coming down the stretch on Sunday is actually in contention because the leaders still have those birdie opportunities as well. 30 consecutive years at the Masters, the winner has been inside the top 5 through 54 holes. I mean, that is a staggering number. For 30 consecutive years it's happened. So I think there's a lot of credence to that, and it's going to be interesting to see, if those wins impact it, and we see a little bit more volatility and some opportunity for some guys to make some charges on Sunday, where they legitimately have a chance to come back and catch the leaders, because maybe those birdie opportunities aren't there 30 minutes, an hour later.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we got a next one. Jeff Jones. Why is Lefty using a 47.5-inch driver this week? Well, the first thing I'll say is go to CallawayGolf.com and check out Andrew Getson, Phil's coach. He actually shows amateurs at home how to use it. He had a 48-inch driver in the hand. And it was kind of interesting to me. I struggle with the driver, and I'm thinking maybe I'll try it, because why wouldn't I? But what do you think about, because we're going to dive into Lefty now. The numbers career-wise on him are just absolutely staggering, you shared with us. But what do you think about this potential? Does driving accuracy even matter there for him? He's not really accurate driver anywhere.
You look at, right. Like I said earlier, and you got to reiterate this point. The impact of the rough at Augusta National is largely negligible. There's no real impact in terms of missing the fairway and hitting into that second cut. Players are able to score from anywhere on that golf course. And in some cases, you think famously with Phil over the years, some of his misses are so bad that they're good. They end up in another fairway, and he puts himself in another position where he can attack a pin and make a birdie, even if his tee shot is way offline. So maybe Phil's got a little bit of that in mind, that, why not? If there's one course where the rough isn't necessarily going to be an impact, you think of maybe places with the widest landing areas. Maybe Kapalua would rival Augusta National, but in large part, you're on the other side of 50. You've tried everything equipment wise. Why not try something like this? Try to gain a little bit extra distance and give yourself an advantage that you may not have otherwise.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? I mean, if 315 is the magic carry number to make the course play significantly easier, try to hit it more than 315.
Right. Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
All right. Here comes one from Ryan David. Can you model the course layout into the predictions? Are there any other courses that model similarly to Augusta National? It used to be interesting years ago when they played the Houston Open just prior to the Masters, and they set the golf course up, similar grass, similar everything. We didn't get that last week down at your Astro Open. I have so many Astros jokes. I'll just hold off. But is there another golf course that you look at that predicts past success at Augusta?
It's interesting. Yeah. You look at when Houston Open was held at Golf Club of Houston, they did a pretty good job of setting it up going into it. I like to look a little, and this isn't an exact one of one, but it's courses where you see a lot of bit of different elevated lies. I think that's an interesting corollary to make, because you've got a lot of, uneven lies at Augusta National where you've got to hit below or above the ball. I've historically seen a lot of good correlations. For some reason, I mentioned this and it's going to come up again. But there's a lot of those at Kapalua and Maui. So I think that some of those approach shots, like guys like Xander Schauffele's had success there, and has had success, obviously nearly won the Masters last year. There's a way to lay that into it. I don't take a ton of it because Augusta is a little bit of a one-of-one type unique situation, but there are some things you can draw from some courses with similarities. And I like some of those courses with more uneven lies. You may find some correlation there.
All right, let's deep dive on Xander here because, again, if gambling were legal, some of your early forecasting would probably lead to allocating some capital towards our good friend Xander. Tell me why you think he could be wearing a green jacket Sunday afternoon.
So 15th Club's win probability model, it takes into account player performance, course fit information, how a player might succeed or fail on a given venue. We're extremely bullish on Xander. We have him as the second most likely player to win this week, trailing only the number one player in the world, Dustin Johnson. There's everything from a performance metric standpoint is extremely promising. He's second in strokes gained total on the PGA Tour since the season restarted. He was fourth in strokes gained approach, which we said is so significant at Augusta. He was fourth in that statistic at the Masters last year. He's been putting the lights out. He's eighth on tour since the season restart in strokes gained putting. At last year's Masters, if you take strokes off the tee and approach, I categorize it as long game. He was third in the field in that statistic. I can just keep going. All the times he's been close.
Yeah, please do.
All the time he's been close in major championships over the years. 7 top 10s in majors since 2017. Only one player has more in that span. 21 rounds in the 60s in majors since 2017. Only 3 players have more in that span. Just banging on the door, and a player who is crescendoing to he's inevitably going to get a major championship, right? He's too talented. He contends too often. Last time we were in Georgia, Tour Championship, he had the best 72-hole score of anybody because of the staggered scoring. He didn't win the tournament, but he putted lights out and was awesome that week. I'm extremely high on Xander Schauffele's chances this week, and I think it's a matter of time before he wins a major championship. Maybe it's Sunday.
Yeah, that would be. I would take it. I would take it. Even though we did talk about it earlier, you do get the lifetime exemption, obviously, but you only are the champion for half a year.
Let's gotta go out and defend it.
I don't think anyone would care though.
Let's go out and win it again in April, then.
Plus, it'd be kind of cool to have Tiger give you the green jacket. Not gonna lie, that would be something that would be pretty exciting for a lot of players.
Absolutely. Yeah, no question about that. One California kid to another, that'd be a fun segue.
All right, a couple more questions for you. A lot of folks are asking, including Matt from San Clemente. I feel like I know that guy. When the Masters starts, of course, it starts Thursday. No par 3 this year, so we don't have to worry about the par 3 jinx, which I think totally makes sense. What do you think in terms of something you're going to watch for? Last year we had more folks finish under par than I don't know if we ever had, or certainly wasn't a long time. What are you going to watch for right off the bat? Because what's great about this with the ESPN Plus coverage and our good buddy Mike McQuaid and team and all the CBS folks is there's a lot of coverage on it. May not be on linear TV, but if you want to watch stuff, they're going to have 4, 5, and 6s on a new featured holes section. You can watch a lot. What are you going to be watching for early to kind of set the tone for the week?
I thought, the big storyline, obviously, no patrons this year. And I thought it was fascinating, the PGA Championship on a course that was kind of bunched together, to see guys like it was a junior golf or a college golf tournament.
Yeah.
He's hitting his tee shot, I'm going to back off. Or he's about to hit his putt, I'm going to back off the tee shot. How does that play in at Augusta National? How does that, where everything is so tight? And I think visually it's not going to look like anything we've ever seen at Augusta. We're so used to seeing the same kind of sight lines and everything. Are we going to get new camera angles of different holes? And I'd love to see, the transition areas between one hole to the next, just how tight it looks with no fans there. It's just going to look so much more different. How does that impact the players' decision-making down the stretch? I know that, some players are glued into the leaderboard and will let it dictate their decision-making. It's more so in women's golf where players will not focus on the leaderboard and try to be blind to it. But I just think it's so interesting that on the weekend, the roars play such a role in kind of the narrative that's happening, but also it tells other players in the field what's going on, right? Because they know, okay, Tiger made a birdie here, or Phil made a birdie here, or whatever the case may be. That's just going to be so unique and so different. That's going to be the first thing I'm looking for. And then the other thing is we're subject to the weather, right? We know we're expecting some rain. How soft does this golf course play? The number you were referencing, 11 players finished double digits under par at the Masters last year. The previous record was 6. So that goes to show you how many guys went low. With the rain we're getting, how does that kind of juxtapose with the weather conditions and it playing a little bit longer? Are we going to see the scoring record broken again, just like we did last year when you had the lowest scoring average at the Masters in history, just under 72. So those are the things I'll be looking for right away. The first one more as a fan, visually to see how different it looks, but just the scoring opportunities and just how soft the golf course plays too.
And the second thing that I will say, the only benefit you could have without having those patrons there, because if you call them fans, they'll never let you back in again. So you got to get your vocabulary right. Live drone. That's all I got to say. Live drone, Augusta National. That's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 guys who are familiar with TV. That's something it's exciting. The potential to all the different camera angles we could see. The access, the limited patrons, almost no patrons. It's going to be great.
Yeah. All right, a couple more questions, Justin. We'll let you go. Of course, we're with Justin Ray from the 15th Club. Make sure you go to 15th Club and follow, first of all, one of the best follows on Twitter during live golf, because you can look smarter than your friends. Just glance down at your phone and repeat what Justin says. But also, you want to get the weekly newsletter with the preview and the review stuff. It's one of the highlights of the week for me. This is from Darren Togwell. Are any sorry, Darren, I can't answer that question. But interesting one. Maybe someone in the background will write back to you. I don't even know what you're talking about. Give us this one. Who's a flyer that you see? Who's someone who, look, House and I like to allocate a little capital in some of these majors, and we try to find someone, a little bit higher in the odds. House likes to tell everybody about this European guy he liked because he had really high odds named Danny Willett. and he bet him the year he won the Masters. That worked out well for House. Who are you looking kind of in that 35, 40, 50 to 1? Because that's where the value is.
I'll give you two names. One American fans may not be too familiar with, and another you probably are. The first one, this guy really fits well in our course model. He doesn't have a ton of major championship experience, but he's played pretty well in the European Tour the last 6 months or so. Victor Perez is a player you're going to get to know over the next few years, actually. He fits our course model really well. We think he's going to overperform what his numbers have said throughout the year. I think he's interesting this week, someone to watch. He's a real good test for some of our pre-tournament metrics too. And another guy who won about a month ago for the first time on the PGA Tour, Jason Kokrak, is a guy whose perception as a player probably was a little bit lower by the public than his underlying metrics would say, because he hadn't won yet on the PGA Tour. He's a guy who obviously he hits it a mile. I believe this is his first Masters, so there's a little bit of growing pains there. But he's a guy, if we're talking about distance and people who can take advantage of it, that guy hits it a mile. And he's somebody who may be able to, accuracy is not really at a premium like we've talked about at Augusta National. He's going to put himself in a position to make a bunch of birdies. It's what he does week in, week out on tour. So he's interesting this week.
Yeah, and the other thing is, one thing we've always talked about is that those who've experienced the pressure of, they always say the Masters doesn't start till the second nine on Sunday. It's moving day. Let me hang me cliches so I can get in there.
Yeah. But
part of that is dealing with the pressure of the back nine on Sunday. I do wonder, even going back to the PGA Championship, it was super impressive, obviously, what Morikawa did. I wonder how much tougher that 3.5 footer on 16 is with 25,000 people screaming your name as you're walking up to that hole, and that kind of juiced up energy. Not taking anything away from the win, I tend to think that for someone who's coming a little bit under the radar, who maybe hasn't been there before and dealt with those butterflies, do you think it's easier to not have, the large throngs of people there, or it almost could relax you, or is it tougher because you don't have that group to kind of like expend that energy on?
I think it definitely has an impact to make it a little bit easier. One guy who has had a start to his major championship career that we literally have never seen in the modern era, Matt Wolff, each of the majors he's played 2 majors, none of them have had fans, and he's finished 2nd and 4th. I mean, I just think, and he's a very talented player, obviously. He's a really good player, but I think there has to be something to be said for the lack of fans and how that might impact nerves and pressure and, some of those short putts. And I just think there's got to be a little bit of an element to it, right? Where it might benefit somebody like Jason Kokrak.
Yeah, no, for sure. We'll have to look at that. All right. Ryan David wants to know, do you model forecasted weather into the predictions? So are you going to be changing it if it does dump a lot of rain and that changes the golf? I mean, the good thing there is they have the sub airs, and I'm sure they'll put up a bubble above the whole place to deflect the rain. Who knows what they'll do? Do you factor in the weather?
We do, but I will say it has a very small impact on the overall outcome. It's not a huge impact. I will say that if you look back over the years at Augusta National, when it's been somebody who's not a tournament favorite, someone lower in the world rankings outside the top 30, 40 or so who's won the Masters, there's been either inclement weather or it's a past champion who's done it. So there is something to be said for that little bit of element of randomness. And look, there's no more randomness this year than there will be with the split tees and the less daylight and the cut has changed. And there's all these different little elements.
A little more Bermuda on the golf course, right? That especially in some of the chipping areas, you're not going to get that incredibly tight lie everywhere because the Bermuda hasn't gone away.
Right. So there's some things to get back to the weather thing. There are a few little elements that will come into play, but it doesn't make a significant impact on our pre-tournament projections.
All right. Well, your pre-tournament projections are available in the 15th Club. I'm not going to have you give one pick right now because you've given a list on the website, and we'll just tell people to go to the website. I'm also excited tomorrow, like we do almost every Wednesday, CallawayGolf.com. We're going to have some notes on some of the most likely members of Team Callaway to put up a great performance. You help supply Matt Royce and Jen and the team with some of those numbers, which are awesome. Also for the LPGA events, which is really cool. And we have one person who we are going to have make a prediction tomorrow. We're going to do it around 5 to 5:15 West Coast time, so 8:15. We're going to have our good friend Stephen Curry down here in the Callaway offices, and we're going to put him on the spot. We're going to have him make a pick for who's going to win in Augusta.
Tell them to stop beating my Rockets brains in every time they play. You don't have to tell them that, but
I'm probably not. But hey, at least the Rockets are one of the Houston teams that play fairly and by the rules. You set yourself up for that.
I blame myself. I picked the wrong water cup. That's just my fault.
Yeah,
I've got 50
you definitely
options,
did.
and I went with that.
You definitely did. Don't worry. For guests who appear in the Callaway Golf Podcast will receive a Tua water cup. So I'll just mail one of those to you. So soon to be Super Bowl champion. All right, Justin Ray, thanks so much for spending some time with us. Again, tomorrow on Instagram Live, we're going to have Stephen Curry. Next week, we're going to have Bill McAtee to talk about the pivotal 14th hole and what went down at this year in Augusta National. And don't forget to check out all the great content at CallawayGolf.com that the team is putting up. You're going to find out what's in the bags for all of these Callaway players that Justin talked about, including a few others we didn't talk about: Mark Leishman, Danny Willett, Matt Wallace. Matt Wallace, watch him. I'm telling you, man, he's not gonna be bothered by the rain, and if he can just get that putter hot a little bit, sneaky good long iron player, right?
Second in strokes gained approach at the Scottish Open a couple weeks ago.
I'm just saying, if you're looking for, no one asked me, Ryan David wants your long shots or whatever, but no one asked me if I'm taking my long shot. That's Matt Wallace. Thanks, Justin. Thanks everybody for watching and listening to the Callaway Golf Podcast. We'll see you next week.